The animal kingdom, generally, the males are much bigger than the females, and are, occupy a different position. What we see now in our ancestors is we begin to see the egalitarian systems that we fall into as modern human beings, and one of those first ones was we are the same size as men and women. Another thing is they're associated with what we call the Acheulean stone tool industry, and that's the second stone tool industry behind what we call the Old Devon. Old Devon were the ones where they chipped a couple chips off a rock and used it as a sharp stone to cut meat off of bones. Even some Australopithecines did this, but Homo erectus began what we call the Acheulean period. As you can see on the left-hand side there, that is a hand axe, which was their tool. That is the tool they are known for. If you go anywhere in the old world, other than Australia, if you go anywhere around there, you will find these hand axes everywhere. And that's what tells us they went all around the world. Homo erectus went to every part, every corner of the old world that we know of. We keep finding these artifacts, these Acheulean stone tools that they built. They didn't have a lot of other tools, but this one was a premium tool. It was able to do everything they needed. They didn't have to have any other tools. This did everything they wanted. They could cut down trees. They could chop up animals. They could go ahead and butcher them with these particular stones. They could utilize these things for cutting meat and defleshing bones. There were a lot of purposes they could use this for, and it's a perfect instrument for that in the world they lived in. And so this is one of the reasons they survived as long as they did, because they had this tool which gave them an advantage over all the rest of the animals in the animal world. This tool that could be made at any place at any time. You don't really lose a tool like this. You may lose it physically, but you can make another one. And these individuals began to utilize these tools and pass them on from generation to generation. This tells us something. This tells us they had culture, because you do not have culture without the ability to learn. And these individuals had the ability to teach and to learn. And so their culture became what we might consider to be one of the very first human cultures in the world around us. One of the earliest human ancestors that we have, obviously, as I was saying here, capable of using fire, could organize hunting rather than going out and kind of catch as catch can, but they could organize hunting before and then follow through on it. They cared for the injured or the sick in the group. Interestingly, we find every now and then a skull or a fossil leg bone or arm bone, because we generally don't find them whole, and they have problems. There may be an instance, for example, where one of the older members of the tribe had been hit in the head, and they had a dent in their skull at that point in time, and looked like they probably weren't capable of taking care of each other yet. And what happened is the family or individuals in the group gathered around them and kept them alive, fed them and took care of them and did what they needed to do. This shows care. This shows love and caring in a group of individuals. That is something that until recently no one realized they had. They always considered pre-humans or other human species as animals or more or less. And so what we begin to see now in the last 20 years is the things that are difficult to define but can be determined for what we find in the field. And they utilized other things that we now also recognize as being part of genus Homo in general. They were consuming medium to large animals. And what that tells us about that is they're very good hunters. You don't go out there and kill a mammoth unless you're a very, very good hunter, or a rhino or something else that they were eating. They were definitely eating, one of the primary foods they were eating were bison, bison antiquus, and some of the others that were there in Africa, probably the precursors of Cape buffalo. And they were eating these bovines regularly. So they were having steaks and everything else that we have too at the same time. The next member that we have here is Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis started showing up about 700,000 years ago in Africa, and is very important to our development. He was a species of genus Homo that lived in Africa and Western Asia between 700,000 and 200,000 years ago. And was, like I said, around for about 500,000 years. Another very successful human species. As we go through this too, we'll see that by and large, many of these human species have a lifespan. I think we can learn from those and try to make projections about our own human species over time. There is a lot of features that this skull shares with both Homo erectus and modern human species. And
it doesn't matter who you are. Having rational, biological understanding of the human condition will completely transform your life into the most...
Thanks, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening. I want to start actually by saying something about where I come from. This is a talk about where we come from as a species, but I think it's relevant to think about ourselves in this context as well. So 20 years ago, I was graduating college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had gotten a degree in animal physiology, thought I might want to be a vet, applied to vet school, didn't get in anywhere. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, and I got a job working at the Boston Museum of Science. And I discovered my passion and love for science education. At the Boston Museum of Science, I met my wife. I met my future career as well, because one day, my boss asked me to help update our human evolution exhibit. There had been all these new discoveries in the field of human evolution, and we wanted to update our exhibit. And I said, well, I don't know anything about human evolution. And she said, that's fine. Go to the library and start reading some books. This is before the internet, or before you can Google these things. So I went to the library, and I pulled out some books by Ian Tattersall. And if you haven't read anything by Ian Tattersall, I think you should if you're interested in the talk after today. I devoured his books, and I became obsessed. I caught what's called the hominid bug. I became absolutely obsessed with the stories that these old bones tell us, not only about ourselves, but about these ancient creatures who lived and breathed and laughed and cried and eventually died in a context that was fortunate enough for us, millions of years later, to be able to find their bones and tell their stories. And so tonight, what I want to do is tell you two of those stories. I want to tell you about two discoveries. Now, the title is talking about one of those, but in order to talk about one of those, I have to share with you what came before the discovery of Homo naledi. And to do that, I want to take a big step back and just frame all of the fossils I'm going to be discussing tonight in a bigger picture. So we know, and we've known for some time, that humans are closely related to the African great apes. And there's evidence from genetics, there's evidence from comparative anatomy, from behavioral studies, that we are closely related to the African great apes, and in particular to bonobos and chimpanzees. Now, this does not mean we evolved from a chimpanzee any more than a chimpanzee evolved from us. We share a common ancestor with these animals. They live today, they're our cousins, not our ancestors. But if this is the case, if in fact humans and chimpanzees share common ancestry, and the genetics can pinpoint the date, more or less, of when we share the common ancestor, and that's about 6 to 8 million years ago, then there should be fossils of things that are neither modern human nor modern chimpanzee found in fossilized sediments dating back upwards of 6 million years on the continent of Africa. And sure enough, we have them. We found lots of these things. In fact, we have about 2,000, or prior to what I'll talk about tonight, about 2,000 fossils from the African continent. Now, many of these are isolated teeth, or isolated finger bones, or a femur there, and a humerus over there, or jawbone over here, and a piece of a skull over there. But each of these fragments is precious in helping us reconstruct this story. However, when I tell my students that we have this many fossils, I'll say, look, we have thousands of fossils, and I want you to know a lot of them. They get really discouraged, and they have to study. But think about the time scales we're talking about here. We're talking about millions of years, and a million is 1,000,000. So even if I'm being generous and say, okay, we have 3,000 human fossils, you would still only have a fossil for every 2,000 years of human existence. So imagine if I ran up into the stands and grabbed someone's lower jaw, and that became the representative fossil of the last 2,000 years of human existence.